All right, we are going through the book of James right now. We're in week 2. We're going to jump right into it. James chapter 1, verse 5 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him." How many of you have ever prayed for wisdom because of this verse? I know I have. I'm okay. The first service, there was like 3 people. Yeah, and I thought, oh man. I don't want to say foolish, but I don't know. But man, I definitely, I've read this verse, and because of this verse, many times in life, I've prayed for wisdom. I prayed for wisdom as a parent when I didn't know what to do, a tough situation. I prayed as a husband, if I maybe put myself in a situation or whatever, and I just needed to know how to be a husband, I prayed for that. I prayed as a pastor. I prayed just in life in general. I prayed many times for wisdom. I guess I always figured if it's good enough for Solomon, God said, hey, you're going to lead my people. Name one thing, I'll give it to you. And he asked for wisdom, and God said, that was a good answer. So I figure if it was good for Solomon, it's probably good for me too, and good for all of us to pray for wisdom. But I'll be honest, the second half of this verse has always been a little weird to me. Have you ever read that and thought, well, that's kind of weird? Okay, if you lack wisdom, pray. Okay, I get that. But God gives generously to all without reproach. Without reproach. I mean, reproach usually kind of comes to the context of like a disapproval, right? I mean, it's like you want to be above reproach as a person, and it's like God's not going to look down on you. It's almost like James is thinking maybe people are afraid if they pray for wisdom, God's going to look down on you. Have anybody ever thought that? I mean, that's never even entered my mind, like, oh, God, this is going to be embarrassing, but can I have some wisdom? I mean, it's never, and I figured he already knows I need it. so I would pray. So I've always been a little weirded out by that part of the verse. I mean, I maybe have prayed for things before that I thought, okay, I could have done better than that, like, having car problems. God, provide a car for me or something. It's like, maybe a little lame, but I needed a car, So I've prayed for things like that before that at times I thought, well, maybe it's weaker, first world problem stuff, like I need a car. But I've never thought that like embarrassed or shameful for praying for wisdom. It just seems, I don't know, a little interesting part of the verse here. Wisdom's a good thing. But it makes sense, this little phrase does, if you put it in the context with the rest of James chapter 1. And context is king, right? You always look at context when you look at Scripture. You can't just take a Scripture out of somewhere and decide what it means. In the context of chapter 1, actually, that little phrase, without reproach, makes more sense if you kind of think about it. So let's go back to the first 2 verses. We started last week looking at James, and let's just read those 2 verses, because this is the next verse right after that, and let's just look at it again. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and that steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Now, there's a tremendous encouragement to me as a believer to know that when I go through a trial, when I go through a hard time and there's difficulty in my life, that I can look at that suffering and actually count it as joy. I can evaluate that and say, okay, this joy, something good is going to come from this somehow. I may not see it now, I may not feel it now, but something good will come from it. And that is, even if you remember from last week, you can even grow to the point where in intense pain, you can have intense worship. At a level that you can't have without the pain, even. That there are times that worship or pain enhances your worship. But here's the deal. What if your mind looks at these verses, verses 2 through 4, and says, okay, I should count it all joy in the midst of this thing I'm going through, whatever it is, this issue I have, this difficulty, this trial. So your mind reads that and says, yes, I believe in God, I'm a person of faith, I should find joy. But your heart says, there is no joy here. Have you ever been there? I bet we all have. Because you're processing, how do I live this out in my faith? Now, last week I mentioned sometimes that leads to us faking it, and that's not what Scripture calls us to do. Don't just force a smile on your face and pretend there's joy. How do you get from your head saying there should be genuine joy in pain to your heart that says I can find joy and even worship in what I'm going through? Because there's times, no matter how hard you try, No matter how hard you try to force yourself, you can't make yourself, you can't tell yourself enough, I'm going to do this, to just say, oh yeah, this is great. It's a hard thing. All you can see is the pain. All you can see is the heartache, whatever it is, the difficulty, the challenge. All you know is that your life is on fire. You're like, there's no joy. There's no joy in that. So the question is, when you're there, and you've probably been there at one way or one time or another, when you're there, how do you make the jump from pain or anger or trying to figure it out to joy? How do you do it? I think that's what James is talking about here, and he's anticipating that in our faith walk in this letter, because the very next words he writes down in James chapter 1 here tells us, okay, you having trouble? You having trouble with this? Here's what you do. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. I think in the bigger context, that reproach word makes a lot of sense. At least it does for me. I can't figure out how to find joy in this trial, in this difficulty. There's nothing positive I see in this. Ask God for wisdom. Don't be embarrassed to ask God. He's not going to be, oh, you dummy, you should know better, you should just have faith. He said, without reproach. Without reproach. I'm glad you asked, would be more his reaction to that. So you don't be embarrassed. Don't think God thinks less of you because you haven't found the joy in your pain at the moment. Just ask him, and he'll help you, and he'll give generously. Let's read a couple more verses in this context. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. It will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. Hey, God, I'm hurting, I'm in pain, I'm going through this trial, I don't get it, I don't like it, there's no joy, I'm maybe even growing a little bitter. Help me find wisdom here, okay? So you ask, believe he's going to give you wisdom in this pain. See? You ask with faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that's being driven, tossed by the wind. That person must not suppose he'll receive anything from the Lord. He's double-minded, unstable in all his ways. So you're going through that hard time. The various trials. Remember last week we talked about the various trials that are out there. Maybe it's the human condition, a sickness, a disease, a challenge, what the challenges of growing older, whatever it is. Maybe you just worked out too hard last week and you're like, I can barely move. Whatever the trial is you're going through. It could be a physical thing. It could be because maybe you made a poor choice. You said something you shouldn't have said, done something you shouldn't have done, and now someone's mad at you. My brother, when he was in high school, called his boss a jerk. As you can imagine, that didn't go over well. He was fired. He was facing a trial of various kinds. Well, he put himself there, and he knew it. And so he, but still, it happened. We do things. We've all done things like that. We make poor decisions and say things we shouldn't say or do things we shouldn't say. It could be that sinful choice that I made that led me into paying some consequences for that, or someone else's poor choice or someone else's sin that led you into the pain you're in. You genuinely are a victim. You had nothing to do with it. That's the various kinds of trials we talked about last week. So let's say you're trying to find joy in these trials and you can't seem to find it. Your heart's not following your mind. You're trying, but it's just not working. And as you're in the midst of those trials, you're starting to feel some of that bitter. Have you ever been there where you're starting, like, I don't know, there's just something that says I'm feeling kind of bitter. Maybe it's anger at God, maybe it's anger at a person, maybe it's a situation, whatever, and there's a little bit of bitterness creeping in. You ask God for wisdom, and he says, I'll give it to you generously. No questions asked, without reproach. He's not going to look at the situation you're in and say, man, I told you should have known better, you dummy. He's not that way. Man, I broke every bone in my body when I walked in front of that bus. He's not going to say, well, why did you walk in front of a bus, you dummy? He's just not going to do that. He's going to go, man, I see you're hurting. Let me help you. Let me help you through this. Let me help you do that. You ask for wisdom, and he helps you find joy in the pain without rubbing your nose in it. I think that in the context of this verse is what this is talking about. The Bible's full of instructions, and sometimes people ignore them. I have, you have, we've all done that. We don't live life as we're designed to live, and it causes pain many times. So the pregnant teen cries out to God in a crisis, saying, I wasn't signing up for this. God doesn't just shake his fist at you and say, I told you so. He says, let me give you wisdom in this situation. A married couple is struggling in a crisis, and they've built, they've just created this chasm between them, and they don't know what to do, and they cry out for God for wisdom. He's not going to sit there and say, man, if you just had done what I'd said in the first place, you wouldn't be in this situation. He just says, yeah, okay, I'm with you. Let me give you wisdom. Let me give you wisdom. Call out for God for wisdom. He grants wisdom. Or a person's struggling with a challenge, and maybe you're just embarrassed personally. Maybe no one even knows this. You're just feeling embarrassed because you're thinking, man, I can't find the joy. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I wish I could, but I can't. You call out for wisdom, and God says, I'll give it to you. He opens your eyes to find the joy in the suffering you're in. Now, in chapter 3, James gives a little more insight in the whole subject of wisdom, and he says that a person's actions reveal if you're wise or not, which makes sense. Wisdom's a very practical thing. You're wise or you're not, right? You make a wise choice or you don't. And so he tells us in James 3 that our actions really tell us how wise we are. He says there's two kinds of wisdom. There's a godly wisdom that is real and is eternal. It's a good thing. And then there's an earthly wisdom which will often get us in trouble, as you can imagine. So James chapter 3 verse 13 says, who is wise and understanding among you? We're all thinking, well, I am, right? I mean, you all think to yourself, yeah, well, look at me. Well, who? Really? Let's find out. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom, mine's in parentheses, does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual of the devil. There is an spiritual and earthly kind of wisdom. Where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you'll find disorder and every evil practice. So it's connected with envy, selfishness. That seems wise maybe to us, but it's really a worldly wisdom. Verse 17, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial, and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace and raise a harvest of righteousness. So there's a couple attitudes that James uses to describe earthly wisdom. A bitter envy and selfish ambition. Some commentators break that down a little bit more, but it all boils down to these attitudes that create division and tension in your relationships at work, at home, in your neighborhood, wherever, with church, wherever it is. When you have these tensions that grow, it's from an earthly wisdom, competing over who's the best leader. I'm a better leader than you. You're a better leader than me. I'm going to be the one who's dominant, whatever. The best mom or dad. I'm a better mom than you are, better dad than you are. My kids are better than yours. That whole competition that can happen in groups of people, or who's the best student, or whatever. We can make all kinds of competitions. It affects how people treat each other, because I want to be better than you. I want to win. I want you to lose. It affects how we talk to one another. It affects how we talk about one another, even how we think about one another. Do you often find yourself kind of quietly jealous of other people? Maybe you're sitting at work looking at the person across the desk or across the hall, and you're thinking, oh, that person has a better car than me, or a better family life, or a better home, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Better shoes, whatever it is. Do you find yourself often thinking jealous thoughts, kind of, I hope they trip when they get their tray of food, just kind of thinking, just bitter thoughts. As you can imagine, that's not very wise. That's coming from an earthly type of thing. In your mind, you've reasoned out, well, if they fall, I look good. That's good. Everybody wins. I'm wise. But that's not Paul or James is saying. No, that's actually an earthly kind of wisdom. Do you often sit around and just dream of having, not just a better house because you need one, but just because you want one better than a relative or a friend or a coworker or something, or a better car than them, or you just assume your children are superior to everybody else's, or that's not living in the humility that comes from godly wisdom. Now, the flip side of that, look at this list of things that comes from godly wisdom. There's pure right? It is pure. It is living this life of purity and doing pure things, peace-loving, right? Not a fighter, but a peacemaker. You're bringing people together rather than tearing them apart. Considerate, it means to hold oneself back, to let someone else go first. I'm going to let you win in this. I'm going to let you go first in this. A submissive, it's the idea of yielding authority, whether technically they're above you or below you, it doesn't really matter. You're just yielding to them, letting them win in a situation. Full of mercy, treating people better than they deserve to be treated. Don't you glad when people full of mercy treat you with mercy? I am. I'm human. I fail. I do things wrong, and some people treat me like I don't. I appreciate that. We're to treat people that way in our relationships with them. Impartiality, the word literally means without uncertainty, and the context implies a humble confidence in God. And sincere, it means without hypocrisy. That is godly wisdom. Now, as you think about your life and how you interact with people, maybe how you work with people, how you live with people, how you just whatever. Think of any group of people. What tends to be the side that you lean toward, the bitter envy or the pure and the peace-loving? That'll tell you if you have wisdom or not. That's a simple test that James gives us in chapter 3. Well, here's the deal. If you can think of any area where maybe you're failing on the bitter side or the selfish ambition side, pray for wisdom, and God will give you generously, without reproach. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Man, I'm challenged. I'm really struggling with this area, with this person, or with this group of people, or whatever. You pray, and God gives you wisdom, and you start living out things like with purity and with peace. Peaceful and considerate and submissive and so forth. It's a wisdom thing. Now, while I believe this in chapter 1, the wisdom we're talking about, it really is referring to the context of trials, I also believe it applies to many things. You can pray for wisdom in anything, and I believe God will grant it. Right? I mean, you don't just say, oh, it's not a trial, so I can't pray for wisdom. I pray for wisdom all the time. I have for years, I continue to, because I know that I need it. When we ask God for wisdom in handling our finances, He'll give you wisdom in handling your finances. You ask God for wisdom in handling or making better choices with what kind of food you eat, He'll give you wisdom when it comes to eating food. Or you ask for wisdom in leading us to the right friendships or the right job or the right any situation, I believe He'll give you wisdom. The real challenge is having the wisdom to know what to do and actually doing it, right? How many times have I had a bowl how many times have I looked up at a menu, say at Cactus Bob's, and because I'm looking up at the menu now instead of down, and I see the word onion rings, and I think, man, that sounds good. Wisdom says, I have been in the hospital rooms with families who are grieving the loss because someone made poor choices with their food. Right? Wisdom tells me I know what happens when I eat too many fried food. I mean, at least that's what they tell me. They tell me it's bad, right? Bad food's bad for it. But how many times have I said, man, but that's good? Okay. Now, that's not sin. That's just maybe a poor choice. I've done plenty of poor choices in my life. You know what I'm talking about? How many times you've thought one thing? It could be food. I mean, whatever. It doesn't matter. That's just the one that came to mind. Finances, relationship stuff, and you know what to do. Wisdom's right in front of you, and you're like, oh, but I really want to do this. All right? But that's the battle between wisdom and flesh. So we do have that fleshly battle with sin, but also just with wisdom at times. So that's the challenge. We're not like when you pray for wisdom, do it. God's going to tell you what to do. Follow through. He's given you everything you want right there in that information. You're like, oh no, but God, I just want it on a silver platter too, please. I mean, don't get greedy. He's telling you how to live. Do it. So you got to follow it. You got to follow it. There's, just follow it. I grew up in a home without a lot of parental supervision, and some of you heard the stories, and I've often joked that I was raised by wolves, and as closer to true than some of you know. I mean, because here's the deal. My dad worked the second shift at the post office, right? So he'd go off to work. I think he had to work at 3:30 or something. I was a kid. I don't know, but I think that's what I have in my head. And so he went to work at 3:30. Before I got home from school, he's gone. He wasn't a nice guy at times to my mom, so he actually had a good job and made good money, but he didn't give mom much of a budget to do things like buy food, right? So he said, well, you're on your own to do that stuff. So she had to go out and get a job, and the job she got, she was a really good salesperson, so she often traveled during the week, right? So think about this. Dad's at work, mom is in Decorah, Iowa, or wherever. I mean, I just remember that was one of, she was traveled to Iowa. I was in every small town in Iowa throughout my kid in the summer years. We'd go with them. Summer months, we'd travel with her. So there were days of a time, at a time, well, it's me and my two brothers at home. That's a good recipe, right? That's good stuff. And some of the stories you heard of things that we thought were great ideas through the years that weren't necessarily great ideas. Now, I was the youngest, and I had a brother who's 3 years older and a brother who's 8 years older. I suppose they thought the one who was 8 years older was mature enough to make adult decisions. I love him. No. So here's the deal. I was pretty much destined to either become a pastor or a mass murderer or criminal mind something. Fortunately, God grabbed me at a young age and didn't let go, even when I tried. So things worked out well for me. But here's the deal. When I became an adult, I started thinking adult things. I'm thinking, okay, I'm out of high school now. I'm going into college. One of these days, I'll get married. I'll probably be a dad someday. And that frightened me. It frightened me. I have no idea how to be a husband because I didn't see it, right? I mean, it's not even necessarily, there was some bad examples. I remember in 4th grade, Dad taking me to a bar and introducing me to one of his girlfriends. That was awkward. That's the example. That's what a husband does. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty sure from what I read in here, that's not what a husband's supposed to do. So I didn't know what this kind of husband was, right? And I didn't know, I wasn't like a complete, fool, but I wasn't really sure how to be a dad, or to be a husband. I just didn't know. So I'm at that age, I'm going, it's going to happen. I better start figuring this out. And James 1 was dear to me. I don't know how old I was when I started praying for wisdom, but it was young. I started saying, God, I don't know how to be a dad. I'm going to have to be a dad. God, would you give me wisdom? You are the father to the fatherless. I claimed fatherless even though I had a dad. But I literally claimed that verse. I said, God, call him Dad. God, I need you to teach me how to be a dad. Because I don't know. God, I need you to teach me how to be a husband. Because I don't know. And so I got to that age, and I'm 18, and I got my first like real job after Burger King, although I still worked at Burger King and did both. Anyway, long story. And it was at a factory that became my college job, right? So it was a great deal, but it was a place where I was able to do the headphone things, and back when we had Walkmans, and I could turn on the radio and listen to Focus on the Family, right? And that's still out there, which is really cool. And it was through that, and some of I listened to Christian radio all day long. That's how I learned to be a dad. And there were these great authors who would come on, and they would have books, and I'd order books, and I'd read it, and I'd soak that stuff in. And that's how I learned how to be a husband. I had no idea because I hadn't been modeled, so I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed, God, give me, you know what? I believe he gave me wisdom. I really do. I honestly believed he would. And I honestly believe he did. I honestly believe I was a pretty darn good dad. I don't want to get all egotistical. I'm just saying, I think I was. Huh? Yeah, see? She said I was her hero on Facebook, so. I think I've been a pretty good husband. Am I perfect? No. I'm not saying that. Please don't misunderstand. But somehow we survived, what are we at, 33? I was thinking ahead, so 34 is next. Years. How does a Cheryl live with this guy for 33 years? So she's been praying for wisdom too. It's not that I'm great, but something has worked okay. Not because I figured it out on my own, not because I'm a super intuitive guy. I prayed for wisdom, and by golly, God gave it generously at times. Yes, I've still done foolish things. You understand what I'm saying? Just trying to balance that out. But God heard those prayers. In our family, I've had a flexible enough schedule. I was always kind of freaked out about school buses, right? So I was like, I don't want my kids going on school buses. They go off cliffs and stuff, and you only see the stuff on the news. They catch on fire, and bad things happen. So I'm like, we're going to take the kids to school. So I was the official kidder to school guy, and I dropped those kids off, both of them, for years to do this, and I would drop them off, and like the second that door closed, I started praying every single day. I prayed for them and their education and their friendships and their spiritual life and their relationship with God, and it always swung around to, God, give me wisdom, give Cheryl wisdom, give us wisdom as parents. I'm just saying, this prayer wasn't like a one and done thing. We heard a sermon on wisdom one day, and I prayed it once and said, well, where did it go? I was like, we prayed this a lot. A lot. You have the same prayer available to you. Want to be a better dad? Start praying for wisdom. Want to be a better mom? Start praying for wisdom. Husband, wife, employee, whatever. If you lack wisdom, ask God. It will be given. That's pretty simple. Pretty simple. But it's a discipline to keep doing it. It's a discipline. So you're struggling through a trial right now. You're trying to find joy and it's not there, and you're trying to, you struggle. You ask God for wisdom. Don't feel ashamed. It's just ask God for wisdom without reproach. He's like, I want to help you. I'll help you out. Struggling at work, job issues, problems, ask God for wisdom. Some situation in your life that you just don't have peace about, whatever it is, ask God for wisdom. Trying to figure out what to do with a relationship, you ask God for wisdom. Want to eat healthier? I've been praying for wisdom a lot there lately. I've had years of foolishness, and so I'm fixing that. Want to grow in your faith? Pray for wisdom.